The storm had passed, leaving Fort Hollow soaked in silence heavier than the mud underfoot. Captain Elias Ward said, "Men, stay sharp, this place reeks of ghosts." His voice carried the authority of a man hardened by war, though unease shadowed his tone. Corporal James Riley muttered, "This fort ain't right, Elias. Feels like the dead never left." The narrator described how the gates groaned on rusted hinges, each shriek like tortured souls. Sergeant Henry Cole barked, "Positions, eyes open," as a gunshot cracked across the distant ridge. The men scattered, rifles raised, breath sharp in their lungs. The narrator observed how the shadows deepened, making every shattered window and splintered beam whisper of violence buried in time. In that instant, they knew the forgotten war had not ended. It had been waiting for them. Inside the courtyard, the air hung stale and heavy with years of decay. Elias Ward scanned the shadows, his hand steady on his rifle, though his breath was uneven. James Riley whispered, "I swear I hear voices, Elias," whispers carried on the wind. Henry Cole snarled, "It's the storm playing tricks. Keep your head, boy." The narrator explained how the ruined walls bore scars of cannon fire, and the ground reeked of damp rot. A crow burst suddenly from the rafters, and the men flinched, raising their rifles halfway before lowering them. The silence that followed pressed against their nerves like a vice, as if the fort itself were waiting for them to trespass deeper into its secrets. As night deepened, lantern light flickered against damp stone, casting shadows that stretched like living things. Elias Ward said, "Light every corner, we see everything tonight." Soldiers obeyed, setting lanterns across broken walls. The narrator described flames exposing bullet holes deep in timbers like scars of forgotten battle. James Riley muttered, "This place is cursed, Elias." Elias snapped, "Cursed or not, we hold this ground." The silence pressed heavier than the storm, and then from beneath the earth came a muffled thud like footsteps in the soil. Lantern flames wavered as the men froze the fort, breathing against them. The soldiers gathered near collapsed barracks where walls sagged inward, and the roof gaped open like a broken jaw. Elias Ward lifted his lantern, revealing bones glimmering among rubble. James Riley whispered, "Dear God, they never buried them." Henry Cole clenched his jaw, muttering, "Command never told us this." The narrator observed their courage unraveling at the sight of skeletal remains wrapped in rotting uniform scraps. Silence pressed down like a coffin lid, as though the fort demanded their discovery remain buried. Suddenly a gust slammed the lantern from Ward's hand, plunging them into absolute black. Darkness swallowed the courtyard, and only storm drip echoed from broken beams. Fear became a living thing clawing through the men. Elias Ward growled, "James, light another lantern, we can't stumble blind." James Riley fumbled, striking flint until a weak flame flickered alive. Henry Cole said, "If this is what we've seen above, what lies below?" The narrator spoke of shadows crowding closer, alive with suggestion. Then a scream tore through the fort, raw and piercing as a rifle shot. The men froze as the sound clawed their bones. The forgotten war had spoken through the night. The courtyard lay smothered in fog, lanterns glowing like fading stars. Elias Ward whispered. That scream came from inside the barracks. His voice cut through the silence, but fear laced every word. James Riley muttered, "No man screams like that unless death itself has him." Henry Cole growled, "Steel your guts, both of you. We move." The narrator described how the men crept toward the crumbling barracks, boots muffled in mud, hearts beating loud enough to betray them. Shadows clung to broken beams, twisting like claws across the stone. Elias raised his rifle, his scar catching the flicker of lantern light. The narrator noted how the air tasted of iron, as though blood still lingered unseen. Then a faint echo of whispers threaded through the fog, low and sorrowful, as if voices from the grave beckoned them onward. Inside the barracks, the walls sagged with age, timbers blackened by fire long past. Elias Ward lifted his lantern high, revealing a room scattered with shattered bunks and torn uniforms. James Riley muttered, "Looks like they fought each other here." The narrator described dried bloodstains etched into the floor like scars. Henry Cole said, "This wasn't battle. This was slaughter." His words echoed, swallowed by the silence. Elias pressed forward, finding claw marks carved deep into the wood, gouges too savage for any blade. The narrator spoke of the smell that lingered, damp and metallic, the air heavy with memory. Then came the sound again, a whisper from the corner where no man stood, a voice hollow with grief saying, "Why did you leave us?" Elias Ward turned sharply, rifle raised toward the darkened corner. James Riley stumbled back, gasping, "Elias, I swear I heard it speak." Henry Cole hissed, "Hold steady, boy. Ghosts don't bleed, but men do." The narrator explained how the lantern flame flickered violently, shadows crawling across the beams like living things. Elias steadied himself, eyes narrowed, and said, "Whatever waits here, it wants us afraid." His voice was firm but strained, carrying the weight of buried dread. A sudden crash echoed as a wooden beam collapsed, showering dust over the men. Riley screamed, covering his head, while Cole dragged him upright. The narrator described how silence reclaimed the space once more, but beneath it pulsed a steady rhythm, a heartbeat not their own. The men stepped deeper into the ruined room, their boots crunching over broken glass and charred wood. Elias Ward knelt, brushing debris aside to reveal a rusted officer's insignia. He said quietly, "These men died under command." James Riley's voice cracked, "But whose?" The narrator described the insignia glinting faintly, its metal scarred by flame yet still holding the mark of authority. Henry Cole growled, "This fort wasn't abandoned, it was buried." The lanterns flickered again, revealing faint shapes etched into the wall, names scratched desperately into stone. The narrator spoke of trembling handwriting carved in final moments of despair. As Elias traced the letters, a sudden cold gust blew through the barracks, and a distant child's laughter echoed where no child could be. Elias Ward stood, his grip on the insignia tight, eyes shadowed with grim recognition. He whispered, "I know this mark." The narrator explained how his past pressed down heavy, a truth he dared not share with the others. James Riley leaned in, asking, "Elias, who did this?" But the captain turned away, silence his only reply. Henry Cole muttered, "Secrets once save us. Whatever happened here is still watching." The narrator described how the barracks groaned, beams shifting as if the building breathed. The whispers grew louder now, overlapping, desperate voices pleading in unison, "Do not leave us again." Lantern flames sputtered, casting the men's faces in stark relief. The narrator ended the moment with dread tightening around them, the fort awakening its ghosts. The fog thickened, pressing against the walls as though the fort itself wanted to suffocate them. Elias Ward whispered, "Stay close. No man wanders alone." James Riley snapped back, "We shouldn't be here at all, Elias. Something wants us gone." Henry Cole's eyes narrowed as he muttered, "Fear's rotting you, boy. Pull yourself together." The narrator described how suspicion hung heavier than the air, each man glancing at the other as if expecting betrayal. The fort groaned, timbers bending like bones under weight. Elias clenched his jaw, his mind racing with memories he dared not voice. The narrator said the men's shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting into shapes not their own. Somewhere in that silence, a door slammed shut by unseen hands, sealing them deeper into the nightmare. Inside the ruined chapel, the men sought shelter, their lanterns casting trembling light across fractured stained glass. Elias Ward said, "Keep watch, these walls have eyes." James Riley whispered, "Those voices. They're closer now." Henry Cole growled, "Stop feeding your fear. Ghosts don't bleed." The narrator explained how their reflections shimmered in broken glass, distorted as though mocking them. Elias stood rigid at the altar, where bloodstains marred the stone. He muttered, "They died here praying for salvation that never came." James shivered, saying, "Maybe their prayers turned into curses." The narrator spoke of the silence breaking under a faint sob, echoing from the rafters, though no one was there. The soldiers argued, fear snapping into anger. James Riley shouted, "You're hiding something, Elias. You knew about this place." Elias Ward barked, "Hold your tongue before it gets you killed." The narrator explained how Riley's hands trembled on his rifle, torn between fear and rage. Henry Cole stepped forward, shoving between them, growling, "We turn on each other, we die here." Elias's scarred face twisted with conflict as he muttered, "I've seen this mark before, in another war." The narrator described lantern light, trembling as if it feared their words. Riley's voice broke, "What aren't you telling us, Captain?" The silence that followed was heavier than any answer Elias could give. The men moved to the mess hall, where overturned tables and shattered dishes littered the floor. Elias Ward muttered, "They starve here." James Riley whispered, "Or were left to starve." The narrator described claw marks across the walls, desperate hands that had scraped for escape. Henry Cole lifted a rusted chain still nailed to the stone and growled, "This wasn't a fort, it was a prison." Elias turned away, shame darkening his eyes. The narrator explained how the whispers grew louder, overlapping voices crying betrayal, demanding justice. James shuddered, muttering, they were abandoned by their own. The lantern flame sputtered and nearly died, leaving only the sound of chains rattling in the darkness. The storm outside howled through broken shutters as the men huddled in silence. Elias Ward finally spoke, his voice low. This fort wasn't just lost, it was erased. James Riley's voice shook as he asked, "By who, Elias? Who wanted this forgotten?" Henry Cole glared, saying, "And why do you sound like you already know?" The narrator explained how Elias's silence spoke louder than words, his face lined with guilt that had haunted him long before this night. Shadows pressed tighter, as if waiting for truth to break free. The narrator described footsteps echoing in the hallway beyond, steady, deliberate, yet belonging to no living man. The soldiers lifted their rifles as the fort itself seemed to answer their fear. The barracks door slammed open with a force no man touched, and cold air swept through the room. Elias Ward shouted, "Weapons ready," as the lanterns flickered violently. James Riley whispered, "They're here with us." The narrator described how bloody handprints appeared along the crumbling walls, wet and fresh, though no living hand had made them. Henry Cole growled, "It's trickery, nothing more," yet his voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. The narrator explained how the fort seemed to pulse with memory, its walls trembling with screams of battles long buried. Elias clenched his rifle tighter, muttering, "We walk in graves, and they know our names." The room fell into silence as the whispers rose again, louder than ever, carrying sorrow and rage in equal measure. The men moved cautiously into the hallway, each step echoing as if hundreds followed. Elias Ward said, "Eyes forward, don't falter." The narrator described bloodstains streaking across the floorboards, trailing into the dark. James Riley muttered, "They're leading us somewhere." Henry Cole snapped, "We don't follow ghosts," but his eyes betrayed the fear in him. Lantern light caught faded murals, now smeared with crimson, depicting soldiers in desperate battle. Elias whispered, "The dead want us to see." The narrator explained how the fort itself guided them deeper, the air vibrating with a chorus of voices too broken to silence. As the men turned the corner, a shadow loomed, taller than any man, waiting for them. The shadow broke apart into visions, ghostly soldiers locked in eternal combat, their bayonets piercing and bodies falling though no flesh remained. Elias Ward whispered, "We're seeing the war itself." James Riley covered his ears, shouting, "Make it stop." The narrator described how screams filled the corridor, echoing with rage and agony. Henry Cole raised his rifle, though it passed harmlessly through the apparitions. He muttered, "They want us to remember what was buried." Elias's scarred face twisted as guilt rippled across his features. The narrator explained how the phantoms relived the forgotten battle, blood spattering across the walls though none of it was real. Still, the smell of iron filled their nostrils, choking them with memory. The visions faded, leaving silence heavier than before. Elias Ward said, "This fort wasn't abandoned, it was silenced." James Riley whispered, "By whose hand? Elias, tell us." The narrator described Elias lowering his head, shadows concealing his eyes, as if the ghosts themselves demanded his confession. Henry Cole's voice hardened. "If you're holding back, it'll kill us." Elias muttered, "Orders buried them alive. This place was meant to vanish." The narrator explained how Riley staggered back, horrified, saying, "You knew all along." Elias's voice cracked. "I fought in that war, and I saw what they did." The fort groaned under the weight of his words, chains rattling unseen, as if the dead themselves approved of the truth finally spoken. The ground shook, dust raining from the ceiling as the fort responded to Elias Ward's confession. James Riley shouted, "We're not meant to leave alive." Henry Cole roared, "Then we fight, ghosts or not." The narrator described doors slamming open across the hallway, black fog spilling forth like smoke from unseen fire. Elias steadied himself, his rifle raised, muttering, "If the dead demand justice, we'll face them head-on." The whispers rose to a scream, 1,000 voices crying out for vengeance. The narrator explained how the lanterns burst, plunging them into red light glowing from the very walls. Blood seeped from the cracks in stone, running like rivers across the floor. The fort had come alive, and the battle had only begun. The barracks trembled as if alive, and the red glow dimmed into shadows. Elias Ward said, "The truth lies deeper, below us." James Riley whispered, "You mean the tunnels?" Henry Cole growled, "If they're real, they'll swallow us whole." The narrator described how Elias pressed his hand against the floorboards, hearing the hollow echo of chambers beneath. Riley muttered, "Those voices, they come from underground." Elias's scarred face hardened as he muttered, "I fought here once. I saw them seal the doors." The narrator explained how the soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, each man realizing their captain carried secrets darker than the fort itself. The walls moaned, dust spilling as though the dead demanded they descend and witness the truth. The soldiers pried open a rotted trapdoor, the air beneath cold and foul. Elias Ward whispered, "Down there, the war never ended." James Riley stammered, "I don't want to see what waits." Henry Cole barked, "Then stay behind and rot with ghosts." The narrator described lantern light spilling into blackness, revealing stone steps slick with mold. Elias descended first, each step heavy with memory. Riley followed, trembling but unwilling to be left alone, while Cole brought up the rear, rifle steady. The narrator explained how whispers grew stronger, voices of men pleading in anguish, "We were left to die." The tunnels swallowed them whole, the air thick with decay, carrying the weight of forgotten betrayal. The tunnel stretched long and narrow, lined with chains that still rattled faintly, though untouched. Elias Ward whispered, "This was no refuge. It was their grave." James Riley muttered, "They locked their own inside." Henry Cole spat, "Command sacrificed them." The narrator described how skeletal remains slumped against the walls, uniforms rotted but insignias still gleaming faintly. Elias stopped, staring at one corpse and muttered, "I knew this man. He fought beside me." Riley recoiled, whispering, "They were your brothers." The narrator explained how the dead seemed to rise in memory, hollow eyes watching, accusing Elias with silence heavier than words. The lantern flame bent, nearly extinguished by the chill of the tomb. The whispers erupted into screams, overlapping cries of betrayal filling the tunnel. Elias Ward clutched his head, shouting, "I can hear them all." James Riley cried, "They curse us, Elias, they curse you." Henry Cole raised his rifle, firing blindly into the dark as shadows surged. The narrator explained how ghostly figures emerged, soldiers clawing forward with hollow eyes and twisted mouths. Elias stumbled, dropping to his knees, whispering, "I left them here. I obeyed the order." Riley stared at him in horror, shouting, "You condemned them." The narrator described how the tunnel quaked, bones rattling against stone, and the phantoms pressed closer, demanding judgment. The tunnel roared with the fury of the dead, yet in the chaos Elias Ward rose to his feet. He shouted, "If judgment is mine, I'll face it." The narrator explained how his voice cut through the screams, silencing them for a heartbeat. James Riley whispered, "Then confess, Elias, tell the truth." Henry Cole lowered his rifle, eyes fixed on the captain. Elias said, "Command ordered the fort sealed, every man locked inside. I carried that order with my silence." The narrator described how the phantoms froze, their hollow faces turned toward him, the air trembling with sorrow. Riley's voice cracked, "You chose silence over their lives." The fort moaned in reply, as if waiting for the final price to be paid. The tunnel walls shook violently, stones cracking as the dead screamed louder. Elias Ward roared, "Enough! If you want me, take me!" James Riley shouted, "Elias, don't!" The narrator described the phantoms pressing closer, their hollow faces dripping sorrow. Henry Cole growled, "We fight until nothing's left." Elias raised his rifle, eyes blazing with fury and guilt, as if the ghosts themselves were his final enemy. The narrator explained how the ground split open, and a rush of red light poured upward like fire from the earth. The soldiers steadied themselves, rifles aimed into the darkness, hearts pounding as the fort demanded blood. The reckoning had begun, and escape was no longer possible. Phantoms surged forward, spectral bayonets flashing in ghostly hands. Elias Ward fired into the void, his rifle's echo mingling with screams. James Riley cried, "They don't fall, Elias, they don't fall!" Henry Cole swung his bayonet wildly, shouting, "Then we cut them until we do." The narrator described how the men fought shadows that could not be slain, every shot and thrust swallowed by endless darkness. Elias muttered, "We're not fighting them, we're fighting the guilt they carry." Riley shouted back, "Then confess it all." The narrator explained how the tunnel twisted, its walls closing like jaws, trapping them within the heart of the forgotten war. Amid the chaos, Elias Ward dropped his rifle, shouting, "I obeyed orders that damned them all. I watched them seal the gates." The phantoms halted, their hollow eyes fixed on him. James Riley gasped, "You betrayed them." Henry Cole growled, "And us by silence." The narrator described how Elias's scarred face twisted with agony as he cried, "I carried their screams for 20 years." The ghosts wailed in reply, voices rising like a storm. Riley shouted, "Then redeem yourself now." The narrator explained how Elias stepped forward unarmed, arms spread, offering himself to the dead. For a moment, the tunnel grew silent, as if even the fort itself held its breath. The phantoms rushed, passing through Elias Ward's body, their screams echoing inside his chest. He fell to his knees, clutching his heart, gasping, "They burn in me." James Riley lunged forward, shouting, "Elias, don't leave us." Henry Cole dragged Riley back, growling, "It's his choice." The narrator described how Elias's body shook as visions poured through him, soldiers clawing, pleading, dying in the sealed fort. Elias whispered, "They want justice, not escape." The tunnel walls bled with light, stone crumbling, dust raining down. The narrator explained how Elias rose again, pale but resolute, carrying the burden of every dead soul in his trembling frame. Elias Ward stood tall, his voice no longer his own but a chorus of the fallen. He roared, "This fort was their grave, and I their witness. Now their vengeance is mine." James Riley whispered in awe, "He carries them." Henry Cole's eyes widened as he muttered, "Then let him finish it." The narrator described how Elias marched forward, spectral fire burning in his eyes, as the phantoms followed like an army behind him. The fort shook, stones splitting, as the ghosts surged toward the surface for their final reckoning. Riley and Cole watched in silence, knowing the battle to come would decide whether the past devoured them all, or finally found peace. The tunnel burst open into the courtyard, stone and earth collapsing as Elias Ward emerged with the ghostly host behind him. James Riley shouted, "Dear God, he brought them all." Henry Cole muttered, "No, he became them." The narrator described how Elias's voice thundered with 1,000 cries, "This land drank our blood, and now it will remember us." The phantoms surged outward, filling the fort with a red glow that turned night into hellfire. Riley staggered back, shielding his eyes as spectral soldiers marched in silence, bayonets gleaming like stars. The narrator explained how Elias strode forward, his body trembling under the weight of vengeance, yet his scarred face resolute. The reckoning had reached its peak, and the fort shook with fury long denied. The ground split with thunder, blood-red cracks tearing across the courtyard. Elias Ward roared, "Justice for the forgotten." The narrator described how the phantoms screamed as one, storming the shattered gates like soldiers reclaiming their last battle. James Riley shouted, "They're leaving the fort." Henry Cole growled, "No, they're bound to it. They'll burn it down with us inside." The narrator explained how Elias raised his hand, the dead halting mid-charge. Their hollow faces turned to him. His voice trembled as he said, "Not vengeance, release." The fort groaned in reply, its walls crumbling as if unwilling to let go. The soldiers braced themselves, knowing the dead would not leave until their truth was carved into history. Elias Ward dropped to his knees, his voice breaking as he cried, "I carried your silence, but tonight I give you voice." The narrator described the ghosts falling still, their bayonets lowering as sorrow rippled through the courtyard. James Riley muttered, "He's giving himself to them." Henry Cole clenched his fists, whispering, "Damn fool, he'll be lost." Elias shouted, "Let my life pay the debt my silence owed." The narrator explained how the phantoms rose in unison, surrounding him, their hollow forms glowing brighter until their shapes dissolved into flames of memory. Riley shouted, "Elias, no!" But the captain's scarred face turned calm at last as the fire consumed him, his sacrifice sealing the forgotten war. The courtyard erupted in silence as Elias Ward vanished in spectral fire, leaving nothing but ash carried by the wind. James Riley collapsed to the ground, whispering, "He's gone." Henry Cole muttered, "No, he's free." The narrator explained how the fort grew still, its stones no longer groaning, its shadows no longer alive. The whispers ceased, and only the echo of Elias's sacrifice lingered in the air. Riley's voice cracked as he said, "They're at peace now." The narrator described the courtyard bathed in pale moonlight, the red glow fading, leaving ruins quiet for the first time in decades. Cole lifted Riley to his feet, muttering, "The dead rest, but we carry the scars." The dawn broke over Fort Hollow, painting the ruins gold and crimson. James Riley whispered, "Will anyone ever know what happened here?" Henry Cole answered, "They'll know through us if we live to tell it." The narrator explained how Riley's young face carried the weight of ages now, eyes hardened by all he had seen. Cole's grim stare softened as he looked at the horizon, muttering, "Sometimes survival is the only redemption we get." The fort stood silent behind them, its ghosts finally laid to rest, its walls crumbling into history. The narrator closed with a final thought. Elias Ward was gone, but his sacrifice echoed like thunder, a reminder that the land never forgets the blood it has swallowed.